Like the books typically are pretty filled with daring do and grit and stuff, but it's pitched for boys. It's trying to think through what would I want to exemplify for a young man.
Welcome back to the Men's Adventure Fiction Podcast. I'm here with two legends of the trade here, Zack, Grafman, Frank Theodat. I guess three legends because we got Luke Goodish as well. Another fun week talking about adventure fiction, pulp, the whole 9 yards. It's going to be a blast. We're here talking about a bunch of different things that all pertain to one really big thing, and that is a really fun collection that Luke and I had the opportunity to be a part of, and it is for the Boys Book of Adventure, a collection of short stories. Luke and I both got to write one, so it's been an incredible honor. Thanks to Frank and Zack for having us be involved. But this week, we're going to be talking about something very, very near and dear to all of our hearts, because it has to do with this, and it has to do with trying to make the world a better place as a whole. You want to tell them what it is, my friend Luke?
Yeah, so we're talking about that type of fiction, men's adventure fiction for the boys, going back to when you're younger in the formative years, and why these stories are so important for that age bracket. I think this will be a fun discussion, especially with you two fine gentlemen. I'm excited for this. So how about you guys introduce yourselves to the podcast, and we'll get rocking and rolling into this topic.
You want me to take that, Zack?
Standoff. It's a standoff.
Whoever's quickest to the draw.
I might have known. Yeah, well, I guess so. Well, it's great to be back at the Men's Adventure Fiction Podcast. I was here, I don't even remember when it was, a couple months ago, I want to say, just talking about all good things pulp and short stories. For those who are just tuning in and seeing my wonderful face, I am Frank Theodat. I am the founding partner, one of the founding partners, and editor-in-chief for Pulp, Pipe, and Poetry magazine on Substack. I am also a writer of short stories, science fiction, horror, fantasy, speculative fiction, all the great stuff there. And my co-editor, deputy editor, the man who keeps the Substack running efficiently and making sure that I'm on top of everything, Mr. Zack Grafman, and I are working on an anthology for boys' adventure fiction, which we'll talk a little bit later on.
Awesome.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, and I'm Zack Grafman. We were laughing before we went live. I've kind of been orbiting, I think, getting to know you guys just from how it goes on the internet, various different sources. I think Nathaniel, we met before we actually met through the Pulp kind of connection. I think we connected over it in the Get Piped Discord, which is like a YouTuber who does like pipe tobacco stuff. Frank and I actually met through Substack, weirdly enough. So we met in this a Discord that's being run by it's called the Soaring 20s Social Club, and a bunch of that's where all of us guys who have kind of founded Pulp, Pipe, and Poetry all met and got together, and we were all just kind of chopping it up in the Discord, and we realized that we all shared this kind of love of this kind of specific era, genre, ethos, like of fiction writing. So I've been, writing ever since I was like a kid, like ever since I can remember, on and off, and really picked it up again once I kind of became a dad and had some extra time on my hands and wanted to start, creating stuff that I liked growing up and stuff that was interesting to me. I think it's a Lewis quote where he says we just wrote the kind of stories that we wanted to read that we didn't find, and so that's what I've been doing for a couple years, just in various things. I've been writing some short stories and stuff for Pulp, Pipe, and Poetry. I've been doing some nonfiction stuff. I've been doing a bunch of essays on my own Substack called Infinite Dominion. I've got a novel that I'm cooking on right now. And, other than that, awesome. Frank and I are both dads, which is, will come up quite a bit here pretty soon. And, I'm an assistant pastor at my local church, and just, that's all the stuff that I do, by day.
Yeah. I remember you posted in the Get Piped Discord, you were like, me and some of my friends just started this thing called Pulp, Pipe, and Poetry. I was like, dude, what the heck? I didn't even know other people really knew about Pulp. This is incredible. So I immediately went over there and subscribed, and I've just been loving what you guys have done with that. So truly an incredible honor when you guys reached out about writing a short story for the Boys Book of Adventure. Too cool. What an honor. But yeah, we're gonna just dive right in. I don't know. Does anyone want to go first, specifically talking about one of their favorite kind of authors, book series that are for the boys? I can start us.
Well, I think the
Sorry, go
I
ahead,
was
Frank.
gonna say, I think in terms of like, no. I think in terms of just like how boys, just on the history of boys adventure fiction, to kind of give context to what it is not, what it encompasses, its detail, should be queued up for Mr. Grafman, because he is really our resident commentator and historian when it comes to boys adventure fiction, to kind of just give you the lay of the land of what we had, what they took from us, and where we're trying to go.
What they took from us.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's so funny because like, so I don't know what your guys' backgrounds are, right? But I always kind of approach this from like a personal point of view, because all this stuff, I think we all share this on the call. This stuff was really meaningful to me growing up, and really helped to shape like my outlook on how I read, how I write, and stuff like that. This was a big part of like my life, right? I grew up, I was homeschooled, and my parents, we were actually a pretty like a conservative household, like media wise, right? My parents were like, hey, we're gonna be pretty careful what we let the kids watch and whatever. But man, books were basically open season. Like my parents were just like, whatever, like you're good, you'll recover. And they would just throw us, we were laughing, that book Death in the Long Grass in the background, on Luke's background. That was like, my dad did that for read alouds when I was probably 10. And that book's, I don't know if any of y'all read that. That one's pretty beefy. Like it's got some pretty colorful descriptions of human dismemberment. So, my parents were like, yeah, this is what the guys need. They need to learn about real life, and reading's one of the best ways to do that, right? So, for whatever reason, that ended up me coming across a bunch of what I guess we kind of call on this, in this group, we would call like boys adventure fiction. And so we're talking about like your classic stuff, right? From like in the 1800s, your Robert Louis Stevenson, Jules Verne kind of thing, all the way up to the more modern stuff. Like I think Nathaniel's going to be talking about the Hardy Boys, which are a big classic pillar in that genre. And in the 1800s, you've got Henty, J. Henty, who's huge and kind of set up this genre. There's some lesser known guys. I write about these guys a lot for Pulp, Pipe, and Poetry. I've got this little series that I do called Based Boys Books. And that basically just kind of like all these books that have kind of been like forgotten now. It's a genre that just isn't done as much anymore. And we were joking, I know, about like what they took from us, but like I think some of the reasons why this genre was so cool is it was specifically masculine fiction pitched and kind of created with boys in mind. So there's two kind of things there, right? Number one is specifically masculine fiction, meaning it's fiction that treats boys like young men, with the idea that you're forming young men. So you're trying to create young men with a certain set of virtues, with a certain set of an ethos that is masculine. You're not trying to create these kind of, for lack of a term, just like soft boys, right? And like, oh, we need to kind of take away all of their masculine traits. You're actually trying to exemplify them and pattern them for them. But it's also specifically masculine fiction with boys in mind, right? Like we all probably like our, Conan and Fafford and Mouser and James Bond and stuff. But I think we'd all agree that stuff's probably not the stuff you want to give like your 10-year-old, right? Like it's not necessarily, it's something maybe for a discerning adult, but it's not necessarily something that is going to pattern how a boy should be looking at the world, right? But these authors, they're specifically writing books that were not necessarily like, they weren't like, for pansies. Like the books typically are pretty filled with daring do and grit and stuff, but it's pitched for boys. It's trying to think through what would I want to exemplify for a young man, and I think those are kind of the two big touchstones that I think of in that genre. And this is something that, like, unless I'm totally missing big parts of the literature now, I just simply don't see. Like when I go to the kids' house, and I have three kids. I've got a 9-year-old daughter, a 7-year-old boy, and a 4-year-old boy. And when I take them, to Books A Million and stuff, and we're cruising around the kids' house, I see a lot of fiction aimed at boys. But I mean, barring the Hardy Boys section, like I see very little that's kind of in this same vein, where it's treating them with like some respect and maturity, and aiming a little higher than them to try and like pull them up a little bit. I mean, I think that's what we're talking about. It's something that we really feel very passionately, and we'll talk about this. Like, we feel very passionately about trying to reclaim this and kind of give this back to boys. This sense that like their reading patterns can actually form them in a way that prepares them for the rest of their life as men. And so, yeah, that's kind of like what I think of when I think of that golden age kind of era of this stuff. And it really did used to be like all over the place. There was this idea that you were going to try and write these stories that were going to capture these boys' imagination and make them want to fit themselves into this bigger world, like a man's world, essentially. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what am I missing, Frank? Any of you guys? What else do you think of when you think of that?
No, I mean, I think well said, sir. I think you hit the nail on the head. That's where we're at as a culture. That's where we're at as a society. We're losing touch with a long lost tradition of literature that is specifically aimed for a specific target demographic. And what the gentlemen at Pulp, Pipe, and Poetry, and what the gentlemen here in the Men's Adventure Fiction Podcast, what we're trying to do is reclaim that. To just put our flag back in this world of literature that has really stood the test of time. You can only really find some of these great books in a secondhand bookstore or used bookstore. Or off these niche blogs and Substacks and newsletters that talk about this kind of stuff. And I think that's what we're trying to really position ourselves as. There's something to be said about writers and artists and all-around creatives that are curating work for the next generation. So much of what is happening in entertainment, so much of what is happening in film and television and comic books and movies, video games, all that stuff, caters to really just an aging population that grew up with popular intellectual property, that grew up with popular brands, everyone, and their mother about Star Wars and all the things that have lasted generations. And for the most part, some of them are just losing steam. And I think it's because we've kind of neglected, and I say we as just like as a society that plays a role in this, we've kind of neglected the next generation of fostering new creative work that they can grow up with, that they can cherish, that they can hold dear, and that they can, really have some sort of ownership, pride, some sort of, have those lasting memories that we did when we grew up, when we first started reading some of these books and learning of these stories.
Yeah, that really hits and resonates a lot because I'm noticing that with like the Marvel stuff or whatever, name the IP, where it's growing with its audience of us who watched it as kids, and then they're making him a little more edgy and a little more edgy, and now it's like it almost has forgotten the child viewer at all. It doesn't care about that. It wants the member berries or whatever South Park calls it for the adults, and they want it to be too R-rated that kids can't even see it at this point. So that point is really strong one you make about them just kind of forgetting them and leaving them behind, which, it is their time to get their own IPs, their own news stories that kids can grow up with. That I love that point. So what are those books? Oh, go ahead, Nathaniel. I don't want to take your...
Dude, that was impressive. I don't even know how... I barely opened my mouth, and you knew I was going to say something nice for it. I was going to say, when you guys were talking about this, it made me think of something, too. Like, they're reusing old IPs and all this stuff. And to that point, there's nothing better, and maybe this is like the inner hipster clawing his way out of me, but there's nothing better than being the first one to figure out about something, right? And no, like 12 to 15-year-old boy is going to be like, dude, have you guys ever heard of Star Wars? They're going to like,
yeah.
Are you kidding? Of course I've heard of Star Wars. They made like 6 movies the last 2 weeks. Like, I don't know what's going on. So I think that's such a, just that alone is a reason to bring this market back, dude. Imagine like you're over there and someone picks up the boys' book of adventure and he's like, dude, have you guys read this? And all the dudes at the slumber party are like, that's a sick cover. What is it about? And then you're just shoehorned it right in, right? And I think we have gotten to a point though where there's like, you kind of felt this with Dune, at least I did. I didn't read Dune. until I've never read Dune. I haven't even seen the second movie, but as soon as I heard it was coming out, my one buddy's like coming out of the woodwork. He's like, dude, I read that book. I loved that book growing up. And it's like, okay, cool. So he kind of had that. He was like, I'm the first person who ever heard of Dune. Like, dude, good for you. And now everybody's like, oh yeah, I've always loved Dune. It's like, come on, calm down. you're just trying to get on the bandwagon. So I think that's a really good point that you guys bring. It's like, dude, give these, I don't know, 8 to 16-year-old young men the chance to be excited about something that no one's ever heard of, and to start sharing that with people. I think that's really, really good stuff.
I think it also teaches them to like, and I'm very against like this whole attitude of like everything new sucks. Like, I just don't think that's true, right? Obviously there's like, otherwise, we're here because we believe that you can write new crap. Like we love doing that, right? So like I'm into like I don't like that at all. But I do think it's really cool to teach. I can teach my boys like, look, like here's this new thing that we just found. Like what's this? It's actually it's like a graphic novel for kids that we got turned on to by my pastor's son called Nathan Hale's Horrible Histories. And they're these like graphic novels about history, and they're like super gnarly. Like my 7-year-old is showing me like, and this is how they would like retract the bone when they amputated a guy's arm in the Civil War. And I'm like, cool, buddy. Like it's like all like, got a graphic novel and everything. And so he's super into these, right? Why? Because they push him a little bit. They're kind of like, hey, this is real gross. Do you want to like check it out? Like, this is about like the Alamo. Like, do you know what happened in the Alamo? And like, he's really into that, right? And again, it was one of these rare finds. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like taking the kids seriously. It's jam packed with all this deep lore about like the Donner Party, and he's super into it, right? Yeah. So I love that, and I love seeing that. Finally, maybe some people kind of pick that up, right? But right. I love saying, hey, bud, if you like that, check this out. I've got, landmark books, which were like these classic old like nonfiction books designed for boys that you really only can find as like out of print, versions anymore. Hey, if you think that's cool, check out Tintin. If you think that's dope, like here's a graphic novel. This is Tintin, right? And you can teach him that he can find stuff that he's going to enjoy, both newer stuff, and he can then go get this older material too, and he can learn it, and it's going to be different feeling to him, and he can kind of curate his own kind of thing. And I want to make him really good at that, to where he's not intimidated by going and getting some book that's an old school hardcover that's from somewhere, right, and figuring out like, well, what is this about, And I think making sure we don't lose that stuff. We're not going to lack for content here in the future. Like, that's not going to be the issue. The issue is curation and right, teaching them how to have like this ability to sift through it and pick out like the really good stuff,
Right. I like the point you bring up too about the scaffolding almost effect of these books to push them a rung higher, and just outside of their reach or whatever of what's, I don't know, considered like kids fiction. And that's kind of what me and Nathaniel, when we talked about this a couple months ago, just talking about kids books for the genre, is that I read some of the ones from back in the day, and I'm stunned. I'm like, they can't talk about this in a kid's book. That's crazy. You can't say that. And that's just because like the content I have been seeing in that genre now is so kidified that they're speaking down to him in a lot of ways, or they're like, you're a little kid. This is for little kids. But the books that, like the one I'm going to bring up when we talk about ours, The Contender, it's a serious book. Like that would fall right in any other literature. And it's not ignoring problems or sugarcoating problems or pretending that things aren't there. It's showing you all of it. And it's like, whoa, I didn't even know that was considered appropriate to show a kid. But they're like, yeah, a kid can handle it. Like, he needs to be able to talk about this stuff. We need to be able to have these conversations. So I love that.
The only thing they like. Like, I don't know if you guys have boys?
I have a boy. Yeah, one boy and one girl.
Do they like to be? I mean, girls the same way. By the way, this is not just a boys thing. But we're talking about boys on the pod. So but specifically on boys, my boys hate to be talked down to. Like, give me anything but something that treats me like a baby. Like, I'm not a baby. I am 7 years old, right? Like, he does not want. So, and he clocks it really fast. He's like, no, thank you. Like, I don't want that. I don't want a story about real life with me in first grade. Like, I am that. I don't want that. What I want is a story about a soldier in, World War I. Like, boys are aspirational. They're looking at like, what is this next stage, and I want to be pulled into that because it feels more mature. And that's, I think, the great failure of like, I'm just gonna like go hot on the pod, but like I just don't understand why we've got this huge industry of like, Alexander's Terrible, Horrible, No Good Day and like Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Like, please, like, yeah, dude, that's not what I don't know who is like, and I know these are bought clearly because like, but like, maybe by ants, I would guess, because I don't think these are being consumed necessarily by like young men who are like, that's what I want is more stories about
Yeah.
anxiety. Like
Right.
they're dudes, you know?
Yeah. And I think it brings up to the related point, right? You know, you like Zach mentions like boys like specifically love aspirational characters. You know, you think of like Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter of Mars, who, you know, goes off into a whole new world that he has no no connection with, and goes off and just does, you know, a whole sense of badassery. And it's the same thing with others. You know, you think of other characters that go from the ordinary, mundane world that we all recognize, going into a completely new territory that they're, for better or worse, not well equipped for, and they go off and they find their way. They overcome these obstacles, they overcome these challenges, and I think those specific messages kind of get lost when it comes to some of the more modern stuff. You know what I mean? And I think, you know, as much, I think last time on the podcast I was talking a little bit about, you know, some of the dangers of escapism, but I think for this age, escapism is just, you know, the other word you could use for it is imagination and wonder. And that's, I think, is something that's kind of, you know, really just lost upon it is what is the next frontier? Where are we going? Where can we go? What can we do? It's all about asking the possible and cultivating that mind, that imagination among 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old boys especially is a lost art entirely.
Isn't that's like, you know, all of, I think of like Heinlein's like Juveniles, right, where he's like writing these stories that are again intended for 16-year-old boys, and they're all about what, well, like 17 and 18-year-old boys, you know, going to space, right? And then if you really like, you know, have spacesuit will travel, I think is one of those, right? Well, oh, cool. If you like that, guess what? When you're 18, you can read Starship Troopers, which is about a 20-year-old boy going off and being a man and like, you know, jacking up some bugs on Klendathu, right? So like there's like this whole, it is this rung effect of kind of teaching you as you go, like, this is the next stage of my life and what it'll look like. And these are some things I can expect. These are some things that I'll aspire to. These are some challenges that I'll face. And it's almost like this, there's a quote, I think it's by Alexander Pope that I don't remember right now, but it's this idea of like initiating people through mock challenges or mock duels through literature, right? Where this idea of, and I'm just mangled the quote, I'm sorry, but meaning like you're giving them this opportunity to test themselves a little bit in the total safety of their bedroom. So then when they meet that challenge, they've already thought through like, well, what would I do in that situation? Or, well, that was a mistake. I don't want to do that, right? And they're learning already, you know?
It's so funny you bring that up. This is like slightly off topic, but I've been just hardcore ripping through Louis L'Amour books the past week and a half. Today, I took the magazine out of my gun, cycled it a bunch of times, made sure it was empty, checked the breech and everything. And I have this laser sight that goes in the gun. And I put it in there, set up the target that it comes with, and I'm sitting there quick drawing, shooting stuff. And I said to my wife, she's like sitting there like nursing the baby. And I'm like, sometimes I wonder if I would have made it in the Old West. And I'm pretty quick. And then she's just looking at me like, I said, you're telling me never in your whole entire life, you've never wondered if you would be quick to the draw in the Old West? And she's like, no, I've never thought that for me. I've never thought it for you. I was like, dude, what have you been thinking about? What are your idle thoughts about if it's not would I have survived a couple days in the West?
What's the meme, right? Like, I bet he's thinking about other girls. And meanwhile, Nathaniel's staring at the wall going, I wonder if I could have beat him quick.
Would I have made it? Would I have made
That's so funny.
But
So
and so this, like, what you guys are talking about is so, I don't know, potent. It needs to be talked about. I love hearing it. And it makes me think back to my childhood and thinking specifically, and you guys have talked about this, we've been circling around it, but when you were talking about that graphic novel, Zach, that had to do with the Alamo, had to do with all these things. I remember I was also homeschooled. Dude, when we got to the frontier times in history, I just went absolutely nuts. It was the coolest thing I ever heard of. Like, I went outside, I found, my dad has like carpentry skills. He also took me to Maine as a kid, and we got like knives from a guy who's supposed to be related to Jim Bowie. Not sure if it's true. I believe it. I fully believe it. I'm committed to believing that I have a real handmade Bowie knife. And we took those knives and we like cut them out on with a jigsaw on wood, and I whittled a like piece of wood into what looked like the bone handle that Daniel Boone had in the Daniel Boone TV show, and it was over, dude. Hours and hours spent outside with my Kentucky long rifle and my bone handle knife. The coolest stuff you ever would see. So I think that also stair-stepped back. If you were talking about the rungs, I think that it's just history in general, right? Like the frontier is so cool, the westerns are so cool, and then you go back to the Middle Ages, dude. Knights fighting with swords. Loved that as a kid. And I mean, I said this before on, I think it was Terrence Lahu's pod. I think the original men's adventure fiction that I locked onto was the 10 Commandments. And it was not Charlton Heston, dude. It was Yul Brynner with that sword, shirtless, saying, "So let it be written, so let it be done." And I was like, dude, give me a sword. I'm taking my shirt off. I'm wearing my dad's knee brace to look like Pharaoh. This is going to be great. So, I mean, just like starting, even like growing up, I'm a Christian, growing up with the Bible, dude. The stories of Samson, the stories of David, the stories, every single story in Judges pretty much. Just absolutely nuts. And it's like, this is the stuff that you want, that you do want to aspire to. I want to be outnumbered 100-1 with Philistines and see a donkey and rip his jawbone out and start killing people, dude. And I'm 10 years old. That's like my greatest dream. Nothing would be better than that. That would be so cool. And I think that's where.
Me laugh.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't know, but it always makes me laugh when people are like, "Oh, like Christians aren't supposed to enjoy like, you know, like Christian content is supposed to be like nerfed or like PG." And I'm like, I understand why people think that, and like I respect people who believe that, but like personally, I'm always like, look, then like when are we gonna go ahead and remove like multiple books from the Old Testament, my guy? Because like I was again, we were raised, we read the Bible in the morning, like that's what we did in the morning, and so eventually you're gonna hit Judges, eventually you're gonna hit First Samuel, and there's all kinds of Game of Thrones stuff going on, and you're like, oh my gosh,
crazy.
You know, guys sleeping with their sisters and crazy, you know, jawbone hitting and all kinds of stuff going on. So, you know, it's like it does, and what does it do? You know, in all seriousness, like that also breeds this expectation of like that's exemplified, and it's not all, especially in the Old Testament. I mean, these things aren't like talked down on. David is talked about as like, yeah, that's a man after God's own heart. Guess what? He also gets it done. I mean, David was like, you know, stinking had a biker gang basically. I mean, like that was his whole deal, right?
So the original Robin Hood.
Yeah, literally, and it kind of, again, it builds this expectation of, oh, this is the kind of thing, some version of this. Maybe not the jawbone, but some version of this is like something that I should be kind of striving towards, right?
Yeah, yeah. Which I think, to your point about like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Alexander's Terrible, Horrible, Awful Day, I think there is, depending on how you take these bad situations, you can hand them something like that and be like, yeah, you're a wimpy kid. It's okay. There's other wimpy kids. You're going to get through it. But then there's the other one where you hand them a Louis L'Amour book and they're like, yeah, the 16-year-old kid he has watched his father get gunned down, and for the next 10 years he was tracking down each man that did it because he was quick enough on the draw in the Old West to make it, you know. And it's like, dude, I would much rather be that guy than I'd rather be the wimpy kid and be like, oh yeah, there's other wimpy kids. Like, great, I'm not alone in my wimpiness. Like, no, give me the 6-shooter all day. Like, let me learn how to be a man.
Yeah, it's the soil for resilience, and that's where like kids need that.
That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah,
because it's teaching you that resilience is a thing that you would want.
Right.
You know, basically.
Yeah. To the whole point is like, would you? I mean, as a parent, as a father, would you rather your son be well equipped in, you know, a situation where life gets a little messy, life gets a little dirty, or do you just want to tell him to kind of, you know, hide under the sheets in the bed and just, you know, cry and hope that, you know, everything will eventually turn out on its own? You know, I think just some of these books. And we'll get more specific, I'm sure, as we get onto it. Some of these books do such a wonderful job of demonstrating agency and why it's important for young men of that age to develop agency and showing that, you know, life doesn't just have to happen to you. You know, you can stand up, you can take charge, you can take action and mold and shape and in a lot of ways just kind of form life to how you see the world, you know. And I think that's something that speaks to that primal urge that you can take ownership, that you can take life into your own hands. You don't have to wait. You don't have to ask for permission. You don't have to wait for anybody else to say that you are worthy. It's our inheritance.
Yeah.
Man.
Well,
Give him Nathaniel. Nathaniel's gonna have the worst job trying to pick clips for the beginning of this. There are too many sweet things being said by everybody.
Yeah, dude.
You guys are awesome at this. I
Well,
love it.
and
This
that's
is
like I totally agree with everything everybody's been said, right? Where it's like, as a dad, I have 7 is a pretty crucial age. I think I'm seeing for my son, right, where he's kind of getting this age where he's pivoting away from his mom. I mean, my wife has said this. She's like, he is pivoting away from me and seeking you in certain instances, right? Something bad happens to him, he comes to me and tries to like figure out like what am I supposed to do with this, right? And I think about him and like I want him to have, and this is why I really like, this is free marketing. This is why really we started thinking about the book, is because I think like I want him to have these role models, these patterns that I had when I was a kid. My parents believed that they wanted me to be a person of some self-reliance, a person who would think through situations to be able to make decisions, right? So they're giving me all these books. Treasure Island is one of my favorite. I revisit that book. I've probably read it 6-7 times, and I remember listening to it on like cassette. And the first time as you're a kid, you're 7, 8, 10 years old, and you listen to, Jim Hawkins, who is you, like believably you. I think he's like 10 or 12 in the story, right? Because he's a cabin boy, so he can't be much older than 10 or 12. And there's right in the first or second chapter, his, house/mom's business is getting turned out by, these murderers. And he, his mom basically passes out. He drags her, down the road and sticks her under a bridge and just kind of waits, hoping that the law is going to get there, right? And you can't not read that as a kid and be like, well, could I drag my mom down an embankment and like hide her out, figure out what I'm going to do? Your wheels start spinning. Like, am I able to handle that situation? And then you say, well, no, probably not. Well, then what am I doing? Like, you immediately start making those thoughts. Well, then I need to be able to, that could happen someday. Of course it couldn't, probably in suburban America. But that's I would rather my 7-year-old be thinking like that.
right.
Like, well, what could life face me with? And am I prepared for that? What kind of resources will it take,
Right. They call that like wargaming in the military. And these Louis L'Amour books or Jack Carr books, like any book you read in this genre is going to make you wargame a little bit, like we've all alluded to. There are daydreams that go off where you're thinking because of something that happened in a Louis L'Amour book, like, ooh, what would happen? What would I do? So the wargaming aspect of this cannot be understated.
Right.
Yeah. There's a book. So I can jump in a little bit. For me, the Hardy Boys were a huge impact on my life from a very young age. Absolutely loved them. I think we got like a 20 books box set, and I chewed through them all. And then I don't think my parents ever bought the rest of like 5,000 of them that there are. But I remember, and this is what I'm saying, like exactly to Luke's point. I remember, and this is where we get into the weeds again. We talked about this on previous podcasts hundreds of times, but there's so many people who just write off this genre and all of its like offshoots, all of its subgenres, and they're just like, well, that's just popcorn fiction. Like, you're not going to gain anything from that. But I remember, dude, every single day from the moment I read the first Hardy Boys book was that if I ever get caught and they go to tie me up, I'm flexing my muscles as hard as I can, because when they tie the ropes around me, as soon as I release the muscle flex, the bonds will be looser and I'll be able to get out, dude. Immediately. I'm no longer a kidnap victim. I'm getting out of there because of the Hardy Boys. I also remember there was one book where the guy had a reversible jacket. And so one side, like he was like a young private eye who the Frank and Joe had to interact with, and they couldn't find him because he switched his jacket around. and I remember that just locked in. I was like, dude, do they actually make reversible jackets? Because if they do, I immediately need to buy one. But that's exactly the point of these stories is you are. I had a younger brother who was, he's 3 years younger than me. I think Frank and Joe are like 2-ish years apart. And Frank's the older one. He's got darker hair, and Joe's the younger one. He's got lighter hair. That's me and my brother. So immediately from the rip, it was like, dude, that's us. We're the Hardy Boys. And it's so cool to think like, man, would I be able to solve the murder mystery that my dad, a police officer, can't figure out? Like, yeah, I gotta be able to do it. Like, of course I'm going to be able to do it. And it's just so cool to have that locked in and like baked into you as a kid. It's like, dude, would I be able to do it? And that's the question that, I mean, like you said, thinking about Jim pulling his mom, it's like you read that and you're 10, 12, 13, you start doing some push-ups. Start like dragging logs around in the wood. Like, that looks about mom size. Let me grab that log and see how far I can get it.
You gotta prepare.
Exactly.
Yeah. Get the imagination going. You gotta prepare. Yeah. Start joining a gym, 12 years old, and start boxing.
Oh, yeah, man. Yeah.
Well, and I think dude, the Hardy Boys is such a good example because number one, it has the problem, and this is an open question for you guys. Like, how do you guys source these things? Because the Hardy Boys, I have better luck with some of these other books that we'll talk about, but the Hardy Boys, I come across like counterfeits or rejackets where they'll go in and later on they'll do basically entire rewrites. I've owned 2 different versions of, I think the first one, which is like the tower. What's it? The tower.
Yeah. Tower on the hill or something, like the lighthouse or something like that.
I've owned 2 different copies with identical jackets in like the hardcover blue that have completely different stories inside of them.
What?
Yeah. And so like these get rewritten and stuff, and so like it's one of those things where you really have to. You start saying, I got to go find like one of these original like 50s, 60s bindings. And like I would be interested to know, like, when you guys are trying to get this stuff for yourself or like for your sons, we're like, where do you look? Because I think that's a big question I'd imagine that people listening to this would have is like, okay, if I'm trying to find stuff that's like older, out of print, like where am I getting this stuff?
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident that
Curation
the ones...
is a huge...
Good. I'll let you finish.
Yeah, no. I just the one quick point. I said, Zack brought this up earlier, but curation is something that it's not really a nice to have, it's a need to have, because there's just such a wealth of material, whether it be books or other items of entertainment value. Like, and it's part of the job of a parent, right, to curate for their child of what they may like, what they may want to experiment with. But I think it's one of those necessary skills for artists and publishers to really start curating their own material for, if you like Hardy Boys, what else could you recommend?
Yeah.
One of our contributing authors, Andy Flaherty, actually has a series that is inspired heavily from the Hardy Boys. Cool. And they have their own quests, more from a Catholic worldview. You know what I mean? And it's very interesting. And I think finding avenues to build that curation skill set is vital. Like I said, just with a plethora of work that's being published, both things that are out of print and things that are starting to become in print.
Oh, that's awesome. What were you gonna say, Luke?
I was gonna say, I think that once Dom just got Grayson 2 Hardy Boys. At this point, I'm confident that they're what they're supposed to be, like from the 60s or original binding, like you mentioned. But now I'm gonna have to go double check and get back to you. But if they are correct and they are normal, he got them from Half Price Books. If you guys have those near you, I feel like those might be the best bets. Is those used bookstores that people are turning in stuff from estate sales and such like that, so you'd be getting something that came from the time period, because I'm sure the curation aspect gets wonky.
Yeah.
But
and this isn't just a Hardy Boys problem. I'm going to show you guys. I've got a collector's item that we'll show off here in a minute. But
nice.
This was the same thing back in the day, where you'd have like pirated editions of some of these that would happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it ever happened to Hardy Boys, but I know it happened pretty frequently with some of these other things. Tolkien got pretty hysterically mad at some point because he got ripped off. For a long time, he wasn't selling in the States, and there was like, I think Ace or something just like stole his book and printed it or something like that. So like this stuff used to happen all the time. Oh yeah. Yeah. So it's just super funny. But anyway, dude, I loved those books growing up. By the way, they were like absolutely awesome.
Yeah, they're very cool. I found like I don't know if it's a knockoff. It really reminds me more of the TV show Johnny Quest, but it's free on LibriVox. The audiobooks are, and it's Biff Brewster. And he is the son of like a very famous scientist adventurer dude. And of course, it's the same kind of formula as a Hardy Boys story where they go on an adventure. His father, of course, is like, all right, I've got to go to Africa for a week. Biff, you're 12. Why don't you come with me? This will be a good experience. And then like right in the middle of that, right before they leave, there's a bullet that left behind in his car. And he's like, oh, my son now might get killed. I'll be fine. And then of course Biff solves the mystery and saves the day. And it's always so great. It is like listening to them now, because I listened to those probably last year as an adult. You are like, okay, this is like clearly not written for me, but you're still like, I can still enjoy it because it does. And I think that that's what's so cool about these, and I'm sure it's going to be cool about all the stuff you guys talk about as well, is they have a very clear set of right and wrong, and what is the good thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do. And I think that that's something that, like we talked about before, these are heroes. They are aspirational heroes. And in a world that has very like out of touch fathers, which I'm sure is true of most generations, but I mean, even in myself, I'll be sitting there and my daughter, she's 2.5 years old, she'll be grabbing my pant leg for like 10 minutes. Okay, that's high. Maybe like 35, 40 seconds. Just like, I'm trying to show you something and I'm just sitting there scrolling on my phone. And I feel like I'm like a fairly okay father, but it's still, dude, I'm just like totally out of touch. So you're giving whoever's reading this, now they have someone who has usually almost, and at least in the Hardy Boys and the Biff Brewster stories, their dad is very connected with them, and he's a really good, strong man who knows right from wrong, and he's instilled that into Biff, into Frank and Joe, and he's taught them how to be the men that they need to be, how to stand up for right when they see it, how to be willing to avoid confrontation if they need to, if discretion is the better part of valor. And I think that it's just really cool. It is almost like, obviously, the Hardy Boys aren't going to raise your son for you. You can't like hand them that and be like, all right, kid, come back when you finished all those. Yeah. But there is something to it. It's like, it just teaches you so much about how to be the man that you need to be, how to strive to be a hero. So I love those books.
And like the Hardy Boys are really, like a lot of the other ones we'll talk about are like, okay, this is what it was like to be a boy or a young man back then, and what can I learn from that? But the Hardy Boys has this kind of thing where it's like they're pretty modern, like they're, you know, it's set in like a America 50s kind of thing, and they're super aspirational. Like you're like 14 and you're reading about these dudes who are 18 and have like modded cars and steady girlfriends. And you're like, dang, like I want, like you want that life. You're like, oh, I want to work towards kind of a responsible life where people trust me with stuff. People trust me with like a little bit of risk. And there's girls that look up to me, and there's like, and it like, again, it pushes you like, oh, well, dang, that's a thing that I want. I want this kind of like life to be a little bit more responsible and be able to walk. You know, they're doing all this stuff as an 18-year-old. They're walking around town, and I'm going to talk to this guy, and we're going to buy this, and we're going to go there. And you kind of think, oh, cool, like, that's a thing that I could want. Maybe I'd better go get my learner's permit. I'm just going to sit here and kind of put life off, you know?
Yeah, there's something to be said about that effect on demonstrating certain qualities and characteristics that you as a young man, you're like, oh crap, that's pretty cool. Like I want to do this. Like how do I start like picking up boxing? How do I start going hunting with my dad? How do I start learning these skill sets? And I think it's good. I think it's healthy. Instead of just marring everything in some sort of fantasy where you probably will not be able, at least, when it first originated, you probably won't be, shooting ray guns and killing aliens, like Buck Rogers. But in the sense, like you can at least have, like if you're reading a Western, if you're reading something that is somewhat modern day and has that aspirational quality, there's a great likelihood. I mean, this is a little bit more older, but if you look at like the James Bond books, like how many Instagram pages are dedicated to the life and the culture and the lifestyle of James Bond, because that's part of the allure of the character. And it's the same thing for boys, is that boys need something that they can look up to that has that cool factor. You know what I mean? Something that's just like, oh, I want to take up this hobby or learn these skills or what have you. I think it all adds to it.
Yeah, well said. Should we get into your book, Frank? The book that you wanted to bring to the table in discussion?
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Cool.
So part of this whole appearance here is to pretty much talk about the boys' book of adventure, which is an anthology, not a start of an anthology series by Pulp, Pipe, and Poetry. Zack and myself are the co-editors, and we have about 8 contributors. I can rattle them off here, or we can put them in the show notes, I'm sure. But it's coming out in next month. In late May of 2025. And yeah, just everything that we've discussed here, everything, all the qualities, all the allure, all the things that make these great stories and these great books for boys super compelling and have had such an impact on people who read them from a young age and who are being introduced to them now with their own set of children or their own set of boys as they're raising them, is pretty much what we want to capture. It's what we want to really emulate. And having read all the stories, they're great stories. And 2 contributors here on this podcast, Luke and Nathaniel, are helping to kind of contribute to that resurgence in the culture of really cultivating the next generation of readers. And you know, they're not passive stories. Like, these are all action-filled stories. They're all speak to that urge, that sense of spirit and energy, in giving some of these what we hope young readers a real sense of agency and a real sense of, like, yeah, I want to go out and do something with my life. I actually want to go out and have fun. I actually want to, you know, add to life and enjoy the sweet ride that it is. And you know, the subtitle for the book is Thrilling Stories of Wonder and Adventure. And that's what we mean. And I think what I'm hoping to do as the editor, or as one of the co-editors, is to really kickstart a series of boys fiction. And the reason why we chose short stories and not, say, a series of books, short stories, as I've mentioned in my previous episode on this podcast, is the short story is a dying tradition. It's something that is kind of seen as the training wheels for new writers. It's not necessarily something that is respected as its own medium in the mainstream anymore, with the exception of a few genre magazines in science fiction and fantasy. But I think short stories are a great vehicle for this age demographic that we're targeting, you know, 8 to 12 to 13-year-old boys, because it's just enough of story to give you a beginning, a middle, and end, someone to root for, someone to care for in these stories, that really captures the imagination and that gets them to turn the next page. The biggest thing that I'm hoping for this book to really kill is that stupid myth that boys don't read. And I can't begin to tell you my frustration with this myth, especially being the not only the father of a 3-year-old boy who wants, you know, like 3-4 books a night on most cases, and usually cries because he doesn't get enough books read to him, but as an uncle to a 8-year-old boy and an 11-year-old boy. Who gets constantly, you know, pulled into certain conversations about how, you know, just boys aren't interested in reading. They just don't have the capacity to read, and that's all, you know, horse manure. I just think it's ridiculous. So that's where this passion is coming from. It's to cultivate the next generation of boy readers. It's to write stories and present stories that resonate with that demographic, and to kill that dumb myth that boys don't read. And we're having a lot of fun. It's a lot of work to make sure that everything is, you know, going off without a hitch come publication date in late May, which is still TBD. But, you know, it's a wonderful ride, and it seems to be generating a lot of hype, which I'm excited about. And I'm sure Zack can chime in with some of his thoughts for it. But that's my sales pitch, gentlemen. That's my sales pitch.
Super exciting stuff. I love it. Yeah, Zack, what do you want to add to that? Because this is such an exciting prospect to get this book in a kid's hands. I'm pumped for the end of May.
Yeah, man. I mean, Frank nailed it, and I just, you know, we just, to be frank, like, we handpicked the list of guys I mean, we literally went down and we didn't. This is not a submission project. We curated a list and we're like, these are the guys that we see out in our corner of the fiction world that are doing the stuff that we want, and we want to give them kind of this like task of like, and we kind of sent out this brief of like, write to this, like give me your best shot on this, and the guys just kind of smashed it. And I've already read some of the stories and I'm like super hyped, right? And then I'm kind of putting together still this kind of like almost like a flag planning kind of manifesto thing for the volume that's just kind of let people know, like, look, like this is kind of what we're staking our territory on, and this is what we want to bring back, and describing, kind of calling our shot and saying this is the direction that we're going in. Because again, we just think it's so underdone, and I absolutely agree. It's like boys don't not like to read. Boys are just really good detectors of baloney. And so when they know that like you're just kind of not trying and you're not doing a good job, and honestly, when they know that you don't like them, because that's just what I come across. I read so much of this boys literature, and it's just like, I'm sorry, you don't like boys. And
Yeah.
I'm not even going to let that get to my kid, because I don't want him feeling like he's getting talked down to. But if my boy reads it, he's just like garbage. Like, and he goes and finds something that talks to him with an attitude that like this author likes boys. And that's what I think ties together all these authors that we're talking about or will talk about. I mean, they clearly loved dudes. And they were writing with this attitude of like, dudes rock, and I like little dudes. They're awesome. What do they like? I'll write that. And like, that's the attitude that I think we kind of asked you guys to bring, and everybody just stinking crushed it. And that's what we want, man. There's got to be love kind of infused in these stories. You know what I mean? And that's where it comes from. And I think it pulls the young guys up into it. And there's this like masculine kind of camaraderie and this sense of like, I've been where you've been, and I'm kind of showing you the way kind of thing. Has got to be a huge part of it. And you see that in like, even in something like the Hardy Boys, where it's like, yeah, okay, these are popcorn stories, but like there's like an ethos to it. It's like Frank and Joe are kind of straight arrow guys. They do what's right. They do the right thing. They're chivalrous. They're brave. If there's an opportunity to take care of somebody, they're gonna do it. You're never wondering like, are Frank and Joe gonna have a gritty reboot where they like it's just never on the table, right? Like, and it's that kind of thing that like we wanted to really bring that back. And I think that, yeah, the authors have done a great job. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, man. So the kids, the whole thing of them having the black and white, the right and wrong done well, where it's like you said, there's not the questioning. It's like, this is what is to be done, so he's going to do it. I love that kind of storytelling. Nathaniel and I just posted about Spencer Dutton since he ended, and it was like that same old school type of masculinity that isn't muddled or watered down, or to your point, like our culture's thrown away the baby with the bathwater in a lot of ways with masculinity. They're just like, all bad thing, don't do that. And the books and everything, the stories, these characters that we love that show you, there's actually a lot of positive characteristics to healthy biblical masculinity that we need. And the books that understand and respect that and can show that, I mean, that's what I want my kid to be reading when he is picking up a book. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that, I mean, I assume it's true for all three of you as well, but almost everything that I write just with the thought of, if I was able to give this to myself when I was like 12 to 15, would I read it and be like, this is awesome, as 12 to 15-year-old me? And so far, I think that I have. I like to think that I'm still pretty in touch with myself from back then to some degree. So it is just like, I loved growing up. I loved being a young man, a boy turning into a young man, turning into a man, because you do have that. We talked about this before in the first episode of the podcast we ever did. Everyone has the question of like, am I good enough? Am I enough of a man? Am I dangerous enough? Am I like good, not just like good in the ethereal sense, but like, am I dangerous but able to control that danger so that I'm not a bad guy? Because nobody wants to. I mean, the good point of a lot of modern commentaries and films and stuff have made the bad guys be more like, okay, this is why he did this. This is the thing that set him off. But he thinks he's the good guy. But I think that there's also like, I don't want to be asking myself, am I the good guy or am I the guy that just thinks he's the good guy? I want it to be cut and dry. Like the way that I was brought up, the right things happened. I followed the right path to be the good guy, to do the right thing when the time calls for it, whether it's scary, hard, intimidating, uncomfortable. No matter what, I'm always going to try and do the right thing. And I think that's how these stories. I mean, I got to read Luke's story in the boys' book of adventure, incredible story, and that's what I tried to instill in mine as well. It's like, yeah, you're a young man and you're in a scary situation, or maybe like even a deadly situation, but you've got to overcome, because you know that's what heroes do. That's what men, when they're at their best, do, is they fight to get through the situation for the betterment of all parties, not just for themselves. So I'm very excited to read the rest of these stories.
Me too. Going back to when you guys were growing up, though, Zach, how about you? Like, what was the book as an actual kid for you, or the touchstone for this genre growing up?
I think I've got so many that I could shout out. I think that I've got one, maybe two, depending on time. But like Henty is the big one for me. Which Henty's kind of like this he's very underrated now, where he's almost unknown. He was really big in the Christian homeschool community, though. There was Vision Forum, which is a now not sadly defunct, deservedly defunct. The founder was turned out to be a scumbag. But the Vision Forum Press did a really beautiful edition of his stuff once they went to public domain. I mean, just incredible color coordinated hardbacks, and my folks own most of them. They'll probably pass them on to some of us. We'll fight them over them, because all four of us boys just tore those books up, right? And I mean, Henty, so for those of you who don't know, I mean, Henty wrote in the 1800s, I think, to early 1900s. He had been a war correspondent. As far as I know, was a Christian. At the very least, his books are really filled with like Christian morality, and kind of all of his books are coming from the perspective of like, look, there's good and bad in the world, and God is going to judge what you do, kind of thing, right? And he was, my understanding about him historically is he was a war correspondent, kind of lived this life. He went home, he got married, he had some kids. His wife passed untimely early, ended up kind of being a single dad, and started writing, I think, kind of, I imagine from this perspective, like, I just kind of want some cool stories to tell my kids, right? Well, he ended up writing like over 100 novels. And I mean, these are not tiny novels. These are 250, 275, 350 page dense novels, right? And it's written in this very old style, like, you're a big boy or a big girl, and you can read some big words and read a cool story. And they're incredibly formulaic. Every Henty story is basically the same, right? They're historical fiction. You've got a young man, 16, 17, 18 years old. He typically comes from a high station life. He's, in this important place. He's maybe the king's son, an important part of something. His dad is a general, and so he's being groomed to rise in the ranks, right? Then he's got either a young sidekick or an old mentor, one of the two. And that character is going to be there the whole time, rocking along with him, kind of showing him the ropes, or kind of being taught what's right to do and what wrong to do, right? He goes through some huge shock, goes off to war, his home gets sacked, he gets taken as a slave, whatever, pick from your big rotating list, right? And he kind of goes on this adventure of like finding himself, learning to be a man, discovering what's important, testing himself against all these, crises and stuff like that. He settles down. He kind of does that hero's journey thing. He comes back, home, whether that's actually home or he kind of builds a new home. Gets a girl at the end, almost always. And that's the thing, right? Like they're very predictable, and they are freaking awesome. Like they're all just incredibly well written, just red-blooded adventure stories. They've, of course, been scuttled historically because, it's, all white man's burden stuff and imperialism. I'm sorry, man, the dudes rock. Like, I just don't know what to tell you. Like, and even when you actually pick through his material, especially for the time, I'm a big Dan Carlin guy. Dan Carlin, history podcaster, incredible. And he always talks about how you have to grade history on a curve. Meaning you have to understand that for Henty's day, his stories were actually pretty groundbreakingly even-handed in terms of his portrayal of other cultures and stuff like that. He was pretty open with like, you got to treat everybody kindly. Duh, like that's what God would want you to do. Like, so that was not common back then, and that's kind of his take on him. You just can't say enough about these. He had a big influence on later writers in that genre who would do these kind of rip-roaring young men's kind of adventure stories. He had a big influence on historical fiction, and he just kind of disappeared. I mean, he's just really not known anymore. I was looking through my notes to try and find. I am 90% sure that I came across a mention in either a biography or a letter from C.S. Lewis that he and his brother had read Henty when they were younger. I could be totally making that up, but I mean, you have to understand he had this massive. He sold millions of books in his lifetime, both in in his original imprints, and then, like I said, he would get these pirated editions that came over to the United States, and those ripped and sold a ton. So I've got this is like one of my prized possessions. I
Show
have
and
this from
tell.
my grandpa. Actually sent it to me for my birthday this last year. So this is the Cat of Bubastes, which is one of his best books. Absolutely insane. Has a guest star featuring Moses, the great lawgiver. Just very cool story. All this ancient Egypt stuff. Really fun adventure story. This is a beautiful Blackie and Sons
so cool.
hardcover with I think there's a color plate or two in here even. I'll try and find that here in a second. But just absolutely insane. I mean, they literally do not make them like this anymore.
So sick.
This is probably, I don't think I have a publication date on this, but this is Blackie and Sons London, which was his English publisher originally before he came over to the States. And this would have been, probably late 1800s. And yeah, man, he's got so much. It's this huge span. You can get ancient history ones. He's got all these ones that are set in, Middle Ages in Europe during the Reformation. He's got I think he wrote some ones about the Civil War from the Southern perspective because he's English, so there's a historical connection there. All this stuff. So just, high recommendation. Just teaches you, again, it's that aspirational stuff. You're reading these books and you're like, dang.
Right.
Could I cut a guy's arm off? Because that 16-year-old guy just cut a guy's arm off. That's kind of he really just pulls no punches. Super fun to read. I still rip these, and they're public domain, so you can get them all on Project Gutenberg if you want.
Nice.
Very cool.
Yeah, super good.
Amazing.
The cat of, you said Bubastes? Is that how you say it?
I don't know, dude. That's how Cat of Bubastes is how I always pronounce it.
That's the only one I think I've ever read.
Yeah.
What was so funny is when you were describing the formula, I was like, that sounds so okay, that's what the story was about. That was all I needed to remember what the story was about. So
that's
good.
all of his books, dude. And not in a bad way, right?
Right.
I think when you're you're giving this to a young man, and there's something it's also teaching you what to expect from fiction.
Yeah.
It's teaching you hey, this is story formula. This is hey, dang, that was satisfying when I got to the end. Oh, I read another one, and it was also really cool. You're learning what the mechanics of storytelling are.
Yeah.
Right. Can't just jump to the meta commentary immediately. You got to see what a story is straight up first.
But what's the antithesis of this character? Bears. Boo.
Exactly.
Yeah, don't bring theme around me. I don't want to hear that. Give me the formula. I'll take the formula.
Funny. How about you, Frank? As a kid, which one are you reaching for? What was the big, impactful book for you?
Yeah, so it's funny because I developed a reading habit so late in the game, but I distinctly remember certain books at the Scholastic Book Fair that I was just I had to have based on cover art alone, and I think of I think of some of the wild, weird Goosebumps from the '90s. I think of some of the editions of illustrated classics. My son. This is kind of how I get to relive, some of the reading with my son, because I've started him. I think he was probably a week old when we brought him home from the hospital, and my wife immediately bought before he was born. But I immediately read to him the original L. Frank Baum books of The Wizard of Oz to get them into that, fostering the imagination of wonder. You're dropped in a whole different world that you've never even experienced. So reading him the great illustrated classics, we're doing 20,000 Leagues by Jules Verne.
Oh, that's nice, dude.
And it's probably, if it's anything. If it's any consolation, if a 3-year-old is excited by this great, huge, submarine, the Nautilus and everything else, I think that speaks to the testament of how great some of these old books are, if they can speak to such a young age. And I think just having that as a father, having that time with my son to read him some, great books that will have a massive impact. Not just that, that it's father and son time, but just having those stories read to you for the first time at a young age has a powerful impact. And I'm so late to the game. I always tell all my buddies that I'm starting to really cultivate and really start to pick up where all these books that just went over my childhood, and you're playing catch up. But I think part of the appeal, looking at it as an adult, especially as a writer, you can start to figure out why some of these stories really work and why they really resonate and why they have such an impact, to which editing this anthology, it informed exactly the type of the type of vibe that I was going for. And that's a huge part of it, right? Is that this book is all about vibe. It's about, that cool factor for young boys. And, Zack pointed out earlier, like, I was very intentional with the writers that I wanted to work with and that I wanted to solicit stories from. And I think each writer brings that type of vibe, brings that type of aspirational quality that I would want my own son to read. Like, I'd be happy if my son independently picked out all the books of the gentlemen on this podcast and the ones that are involved in the anthology, because you all meet the requirements of that. So I think from a parent's perspective of reading all these books, like the great illustrated classics, is something that, I got him a hunking like entire box set from a lot off of eBay for like less than $100 of all great classic stories, biblical stories, Charles Dickens, Rider Haggard, all these wonderful books here to keep that tradition alive. So I don't have a particular one, but I'd say, like, just because we're reading it now, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is it's doing it for us.
Yeah. Frank, are those are the red ones, right, with all the black and white line art illustrations in the facing pages? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, they're the white. I have them. Let's see if I can actually see if I can pull one up. It's these.
I had the
boys here.
Robin Hood and Ivanhoe ones growing up.
Yeah. And I think I read Moby Dick. Yeah, it's exactly. Yes.
Look at those.
Yeah.
And inside it's got all the illustrations, right?
Yeah, like all the illustrated ones here. Yeah.
Right.
That's what we're looking at.
And talk about that's a word that I don't think we've said this yet on the podcast, but vibes are so crucial to this genre.
Yeah.
Because especially with younger guys, like, these are simple stories. You know what I'm saying? Like, most of these stories, even with Henty, like, yeah, you're learning a lot of vocabulary, but the story is not complicated, right? You've got to get a young guy, a young dude reader, like, hooked from page one on, like, this is a story that I want to be in. Like, this is a world that, like, vibes out, like, really hard, right? And that, even with those, like, great illustrated classics, I remember reading, like, I think Moby Dick was the one that I had from the library or whatever. And you open the first page and here's this nasty looking, like, South Seas Islander with tattoos everywhere, smoking this big old long pipe, and you're like, well, heck yeah! Like, who cares what happens in this book, right? You're just, like, going, right? And that's the kind of thing, is you gotta. Yeah, the kids don't read because I think you do have to cater to the attention span a little bit, man. Like, be realistic. Like, they don't have time to wade through a chapter of, like, background. Like, let's go. Like, just hit the ground running and get something that really hooks them and makes them feel like they're in something cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, when has your kid ever been like, I wish they would have given more explanation before the action started here. This is really bothering me.
Right.
But
and most,
I
will say, like, some of these old books, they don't even give you much explanation. Most of them will just mention, like, some old archaic technology, some old ruin, some old map, and they never go into so much laborious detail. They just get right smack into the action, and in most cases, as a reader, you're just like, oh, okay, that's cool, and then you just kind of move on from there.
Right. Yeah, it works. And those great illustrated classics are a great example to throw out. You can't go wrong with those. I know, Nathaniel, you talk about them all the time, as far as, like, great memories and fantastic books for kids. I love it.
What about you, brother? What's your what was it as a kid that hooked you in?
I'm like Frank in that I actually didn't start, like, a reading habit of my own until much later. I read one-off books here and there, like Outsiders, the one I'm going to talk about, Hatchet, like a few really stuck out to me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The ultimate, could I do that?
Right.
Could you land the plane? Could you, like, that's,
right.
Dude, that book rocks.
so there were one-off examples like that throughout my childhood of like, wow, I want that. But then everything else the school made me read, I was like, I don't want that. Get that out of my face. And I wouldn't read that. But the one I'm talking about tonight is the Contender with Robert Lipsyte. I think is the one I'm bringing up because, one, at the time, it was linked to one of the things I love about the genre, in that it's a story about a young kid learning how to box, and just in tandem with Rocky, it's what got me to become a boxer all the way back then, and I still do it now. And it was the lesson of things you read on the page, like a story or something I see on the screen, can impact me so deeply and can intertwine itself in who I am so much that it's genuinely impacting how I spend certain days as a grown adult now with kids. So I love that, and I didn't know that at the time. At the time, I just loved the story, right? I think, Frank, you had that awesome quote recently of saying, story is king and always was, always will be a king. Like, that's what these books understand, like these young books for young men. It's like, I'm not, to Nathaniel's point of don't give me a theme, like, you know, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's also like, we're not trying to like be any pretentious, you know, this or that with this story. We're going to give you something fun and exciting. And the Contender hits really heavy themes about kind of like drug use, and they even mention prostitution. That's the book I was alluding to when I was like, you can't say it, like you can't bring that up. But there is that stuff in this story because he's growing up in the 60s in like a rougher neighborhood, and so that you're going to see that. And so it's kind of him in this push-pull of like the gang life near him and people trying to bully and pressure him into that lifestyle, and then picking up boxing and getting that older mentor character who kind of shows him another way. And the Contender is so cool because many boxing stories are so focused on just like winning, being champ, doing this or that with your career. And the whole kind of message for the kid in the book is that it's about just becoming a contender first. All you have to do is get in the ring and try and just be someone who's willing to fight. And I love that. And so the book is a 10 out of 10, but then it turns to like legendary status when you go to the sequel. And I won't spoil it for people because I think it's one of the coolest twists I've ever read. But in the second, when you see because it looks like it's following a different character, but then when you see the connection to the first book and you realize it's a sequel, is probably the best twist I've ever read still. And it's so powerful, and it's a lesson in and of itself that makes the first book all the better. So you got to read the Contender series. It's amazing.
Very cool. That's awesome stuff.
That's awesome. I've never heard of that one, so I'm looking forward to picking that up, actually.
Yeah, it's sweet. I think there's 4 of them. There's the Contender, the Brave, the Chief, and Warrior Angel. To my knowledge, that's the 4, but it's really good. Really good stuff.
That's really cool. So, I mean, I think this was just an incredible discussion. Wholesome is what I mean. It's just like, it's awesome to see that there's individuals like everyone here on this call who don't want to see boys' lives being wasted and not being treated with the respect that they deserve. I mean, talk down to was a kind of a word that came up a lot. Like, nobody likes that. And I think when you can either put kids in their place or you can give them a place to rise to. And I think that the heart of everyone on this call is to bring these young men into men, you know, and that's what it's all about. So with that kind of in mind, I think for the end segment today, I would love to hear, Luke and I would love to hear from you guys, and I'd love to hear from Luke. What is kind of like, it doesn't have to be necessarily the story you were talking about, but what do you guys kind of, would you be able to put into words was like the first time that you really felt that call, or a really big time when you kind of were like, okay, this is it. I know what's going on here. If you want to start first, Zach, you can go ahead.
Yeah, Starship Troopers was that book for me for sure, which is like a Heinlein book, and it's again probably one level above his Juveniles. There's nothing in there that a 14-year-old couldn't read, or 12-year-old whatever, but really short little book, and it's just all about masculinity and brotherhood and adulthood, like becoming a man. You know what I mean? What does that mean to become a man? And the character in the story, you may be familiar from the movie. The movie's garbage and was intentionally done as a subversion of Heinlein's book. So basically, just like, who cares? Like, read the book, man. And there's really some beautiful stuff in there about like father and son relationships, and the character starts the story in one place as this very naive, kind of self-centered, selfish person, and he gets kind of broken down and rebuilt by this experience of understanding like what it actually takes to be a man and take his place in society. It's very philosophical. There's all these big old monologues, and so it's a little different from like a boy's adventure story because it's intended more to be a thoughtful book. It's not as action-packed as you'd think. Truly 10 out of 10. I mean, changed my life reading it. Just recognizing like, oh, these are the kinds of things I ought to be striving for. And I regularly, I mean, I discussed that book with my pastor on a Christian leadership episode of our podcast we do for our church, where I was just like, every day when I deal with people that I'm supposed to be leading, I think about a scene or two from that book that have just like totally changed the way I think about leadership. You know what I mean? So it's highly, highly recommended. It really made me think a lot more about responsibility and agency, all those things that we've talked about. That book just completely kind of nails.
Right.
Yeah. That's awesome. How about you, Frank?
I don't know. That's like I mean, for me, it's like there are far too many examples for me to really highlight just one as an experience. But I think for me, it's less more of a book or a story, and it's more just a demonstration of, like, ever since I became a dad. I was even talking to my wife about this this morning about, you know, like, when you become a father, everything just changes, because everything, how you see the world, how you respond to the world, how you want the world to be, how you kind of have that, like I was talking about earlier, like when you develop your own sense of agency of trying to mold things the way they ought to be. For me, it's like there is no book, there is no story specifically that prepares you for that type of life in terms of like how you want your son to see you. You become your own character in his story. Do you know what I mean? Because like as a dad, as a father, you know, Nathaniel, you were talking about this, like, you know, being on your phone and your daughter's trying to get your attention. It's like that was literally me today, as I was trying to get some work done while he was homesick, and he's like trying to show me this, you know, whatever show he was watching at the time, and you're in your head, right? You start to be a little bit more self-conscious, and you kind of beat yourself up. I don't think I think of my own life. I think of how I want this boys' anthology to be. I think of my own legacy through the lens of the eyes of my own child. And yeah, I think in terms of what's been hugely inspiring for me to kind of look at how I want to make a contribution to boys' fiction and to boys' literature. Every experience I have with my son informs that decision wholeheartedly. Everything from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to every book that we read together, everything that we experience together, kind of contributes to that. So, yeah, that's just kind of, you know, the long-winded answer for me. But it's just like you kind of look at your perspective changes a little bit differently. It's not, you know, it's not something for me to say that one book or the other, but it's kind of like you, especially when you have a son, you are your son's hero first and foremost, up until they get to an older age.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the fathers, all of us here, because we're all fathers, like, and fathers listening eventually when this airs, I think that has to resonate. It's so true. The way, the impact you have as like a male role model is huge, and it can't be understated for these young men, especially, like, looking up to you. You're the example. I think they say reading, you know, if you want your kid to read, nothing's better than them seeing you read. It's like one of the biggest factors for getting them into it. So just being that example and being that leader is something to live up, like, you know, to strive towards, and you have to live up to. And like you said, Frank, what really struck me is I get self-conscious about this all the time. And I go to counseling every Friday, and some of the stuff we talk about is the internal dialogue and how I'm beating myself up for that and trying to work through that. But yeah, the point is, these boys, we have the chance to be the curators that Frank talked about. We can find the stories, make the stories, write the stories that can help shape them. And when you're a father handing a son a book, I mean, that kid is now taking this with so much more so much more weight, so much more heaviness with that, and he's gonna really, be looking for a meaning. So you kind of have the power to make these powerful, if that makes sense, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So
Well said.
I love it.
How about you, Luke? Do you have one?
I think there was a book, there's a different boxing book that really, I think, just resonated with me and made me do the whole, existential crisis thing we were talking about, where it's like, wait a second, what if I was in this situation? It was called The Boxer, and it was about a 14-year-old in the Great Depression, and I forget what was the situation with his dad, but he was gone, and it was just him and his mother and his sister, and they needed money, and so he started boxing to make money, and he was like 14, and I was like, this kid stepped up and was like the man in the house, was helping out at 14. I'm like, what am I doing? Watching YouTube all day? What is going on? Like, so it really made me like look myself in the mirror, which I think a lot of these books tended to do, was like just help me assess and evaluate and try to become a better version of myself. And that book certainly did that.
Yeah, that's really cool.
How about you?
I have an example. I have an example now. Now that it just occurred to me, and it's related to what I said about fatherhood. Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird.
That's a good
and
one.
I say Atticus Finch because what he comes across as, he's very, I don't even want to say stoic, but he's very much in control of who he is and how he comes across. He is probably the best orator, being the lawyer in the whole county. But he makes the unpopular decision of defending a black man in his county for a crime that he didn't commit. But even still so, what he demonstrates as a character is very telling. I had alluded to earlier about how his how in most books they just add certain details for character development, and they don't really dive into it too well. And the best example for that is when there's a rabid dog in the neighborhood, and the sheriff goes to Atticus's house, and Scout, the daughter, says, "Why are you going to my father? Like, what is he going to do? Shoot the dog?" He goes, "Oh, don't you know, Scout? Your daddy was the best shot in the whole yada, yada, yada." And Atticus, even though he doesn't want to kill the dog, has to make that difficult choice to take the dog's life to make sure that no one in the area is hurt. And that's later played off when Atticus... When Tom Robinson, the black man, is in jail, and he's about to be lynched by the unruly mob, and Atticus goes into his house, and he comes back with his rifle, and he goes to the courthouse, and he just stays out there, and all the men in the town come see Atticus Finch, and and we've already established that he's the best shot in the whole county, and he's there to demonstrate that he will do whatever is necessary to defend and protect who he believes is an innocent man. And I think that, even though I wasn't a father at the time when I first read it, really strikes a chord with being an intentional man, and standing on principle and standing on ground, and not being afraid to do what is right, especially in the when it's unpopular to do the right thing. There was my answer. Took a while there.
Great answer. Very, very good. Mine is, maybe I'll be lucky and one of you guys will know the name to it, but I have no idea what the name is. But he was my dad's best friend's father, and we called him Uncle Pete, and he just owned like 45, 50 acres in Maine, and we'd go up every year to see him. And one year, I'm probably like 12, somewhere around there, maybe even younger than that, he hands me this book, and the book is about a white frontiersman who gets captured by the Native Americans after his family's like killed or something like that, and they decide to keep him alive. And it's just this really incredible book of like him trying to survive through that. He's in a totally different culture, but he's also still like a boy. He's still a man in training. And so there's a bad character, and this is literally the only actual thing I remember from the book, is that his name was like Toady or Toad Face or something like that, and he was the bad Native American boy, and there was a girl that they were both like fighting for. And I think it was really interesting. Like it kind of taught me that you're going to come across people in your life who are different than you, who have different cultures, and you may feel like unequipped to handle situations like that. But this whole story was like this kid's journey to realize that he wasn't, like, it almost had kind of the same sort of feeling that the Tarzan stories have, where Tarzan is like totally out of his element, but he still is able to fight through all of the challenges to become like on the same level as those he's around. And that was kind of the whole story. It's like, this kid is like, everyone hates him, and they're like, oh, you're just a puny little kid, like we all hate you. And then eventually the story like culminates in him getting respect from the tribe and them counting him as one of their own. And it's just like such a cool idea that it's like, yeah, you may find yourself in situations. I mean, and that's like so true. That's just like true of a new job, right? Like you show up in a place and they have their own culture built within it, and you have like, they probably hate me. Like they probably think I don't know what I'm doing, have no idea what to do for the job. And through like building these interpersonal relationships, showing them what you're made of, you are eventually welcomed in. So I remember reading that and just being like so cool. And he had he learned to hunt, of course. He learned to make bows and arrows, and he had a really cool knife that was like on a necklace that he could grab from his chest. So of course for like the rest of the year I had a knife around my chest, around my neck. It was so cool. But I can't remember what the name of the book was, but it was really, really solid book, and it was so much fun.
Nice. What a great memory, dude.
Yeah.
And a great look with the necklace. Knife.
Necklace knife.
Gotta bring it back.
Gotta bring it back.
Bring it back.
Yeah, this was awesome, guys. Thank you for coming on and hitting us with all the knowledge. You guys are both so well spoken on the topic that I could listen all day to this stuff. So
Yeah.
we appreciate you coming out, and we really appreciate you having us for the boys, the actual collection, and our putting our stories in there. We appreciate that, and we're grateful for the opportunity and pumped up for people to read these things.
Yeah. And pumped up to read it ourselves. I mean, it's so cool. You said there's like, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Frank. What were you saying?
No. I was just gonna say thank you for having us. I mean, it's always good to come back to these, but I think having Zack here to kind of give context, and no one has like a well of knowledge for boys adventure like that man does. So I was just giddy to be in the presence of a wealth of knowledge. So I appreciate being here.
No, this is so fun, and like it's really something that Frank will tell you, like, since we started the magazine, that was kind of one of my first ideas, is like, oh, I want to introduce people or reintroduce people to these stories, like, and we kind of kicked around ideas and finally came up with this like based boys books, and I've been doing those for a while, and it's been cool because it's been kind of like a way for me to kind of go down memory lane too, and just like all these are books that are kind of still on my parents' shelves, and I'm remembering like, oh yeah, like I got to get some of these out for my boys. It's about time for them to read some of these, and it's been really a cool way to kind of reconnect me to some of that stuff and make sure that I'm passing it on to my sons too. So this is just the funnest thing to talk about, and it's been really cool, honestly, connecting with you guys and seeing that there's other people out there that are thinking the same way. Because whenever you're doing something like this, you're thinking like, oh, we're like the only the last keepers of the flame here, and it's actually so encouraging to see other guys who are just like so lit up about this stuff and thinking in the same direction, and having the collection where it's like all these guys that just 100% immediately got the brief and were like, oh yeah, I've got this, and just like dropped all these like awesome stories on it, is like really genuinely encouraging for the future of this stuff. So this is so fun, man. We're really, really thankful, and it's going to be really fun to same. I've only read a couple of the stories, so I'm really looking forward to the collection.
Yeah, very cool. And we'll have everywhere that they can find you guys linked below in the show notes. But yeah, thank you guys so much for taking a chunk of time out of your night and spending some time with us talking about why we need to bring back men's adventure fiction for the boys. So I think that was a great episode. I'm excited to just hear you guys talk more and more. You guys are a great wealth of knowledge.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.